Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this overview of Whipley's Unanticipated Change Response Guide. Jim Rohn, who was an entrepreneur and a business author in the 20th century, said that you must take personal responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself. That's something you have charge of. We're going to spend some time today talking about change and a little bit about what Jim Rohn meant with that quote. Your presenters for today are myself, Darren Kling, and I'm a senior manager with Whipley, and I lead our change management discipline and also spend a lot of time working in strategic planning with organizations and companies. And I'd like to also introduce my co-presenter, Kia Morris.
Hello, listeners. My name is Kia Morris, as Darren said, and I am a consultant. I support our change, talent, and culture functions. And my job is really focused on driving organizational effectiveness and engagement through people-centric strategies. So back over to you, Darren.
Thank you, Kia. So why are we here today? 4 basic topics. We're going to cover fear and uncertainty, and I'll get into a little bit of those concepts and how they are the inevitable outcomes of unplanned change. And Kia?
And I will be talking to you guys towards the end of the presentation about unexpected sudden change and how we use our understanding of that to manage change through a streamlined and agile change management approach.
Thank you. So first we'll begin with the human response to change cycle. So all change moves people through this cycle. So especially when it's unexpected or unplanned. So we begin with shock or with denial, or there's some level of not having anticipated this change coming. And then what we're ultimately headed toward is, after a period possibly of some anger or disappointment, we move toward that level of apathy, and that is the valley, that bottom of that change cycle. And what we'd like to do is move people through that and get them past apathy and into acceptance, and then ultimately into being able to sustain and thrive through that change. So successful organizations, when it comes to change management, help employees and stakeholders get through this process as quickly as possible, but also understand that everyone moves through it at a different speed. And so it's important to understand and respect each phase of this, but to ultimately move toward a productive and sustained change. So some of the characteristics of how people respond to change are, and so I guess you'd say almost some of the best practices around responding to change are these. And so a plan is absolutely essential to responding to change. So we need to make sure that we've got an approach. Ideally, it's an approach that was in place prior to the change, and that we've had a chance to adopt and maybe be used in the past prior to something that's unexpected or an emergency. But even if it caught us by surprise, we can still take the time to plan, and that's some of what Kia is going to cover. The thing, and I stressed this on the previous slide, but to remember is that these changes are inevitable and the response is inevitable. So we're going to have change in our work lives, and the human response to that change is going to occur. So great organizations help us get through that valley that I mentioned more quickly and get to that productive, sustained change. I think what's absolutely critical is that employees are going to look to their leadership, and they're going to look to the leadership for both planning and action. So we want to plan, but we want to move through planning and get to action as quickly and efficiently as we can. So Kia, maybe you could tell us a little bit, how do you help clients who are worried about moving from planning to action, that they're, maybe they're worried that they're going to get stuck in planning mode and not be able to move out of that?
That is a really great question. I think what it comes down to is really 2 parts. As a consultant, we try to remember to remind people that inaction is actually a form of action. When we don't work to acknowledge or address a situation proactively, then people begin to create their own narrative, right? And usually it's not in the favor of the organization. And then the second piece to that is reminding them and creating a process for iteration, right? So especially in circumstances of unanticipated change, we usually don't have all of the information that we need in order to make what we think would be the best decision. But we need to be able to act on the information that we have and remember that there will be opportunity to adjust and evaluate our plans as we get new information in. And the key piece is really about leading with transparency and being able to say that we might not have all of the answers right now, but we have a North Star, we know what we want to look like at the end of this, and we're working towards that with some thoughtfulness and some intention.
Thank you, Kia. Great points. So moving on, this is just a quick look at WIPLE's unanticipated change response guide. So what we've made available is a tool set and guidelines to go with that that'll walk you through 6 steps, and I'll touch on those here in just a second, around unanticipated change and how you can respond to that. And we do provide with the tool set all of the templates and tables that are included in it for you to use. And remember, you can take these and make them your own. I mean, they are a starting point, and you could use them, as they are. But also, a lot of organizations like to just customize these and fit them into their overall documentation plan. Either way, it's out there. It's ready for you to use. So, taking a look at managing unanticipated change, Kia is going to walk us through briefly the 6 steps in the toolkit.
Yeah, so as Darren mentioned, there are 6 steps. And again, we took this approach to 6 steps because it really highlights all of the key elements of a solid change management framework, but gives you the flexibility and agility to, again, make this process really iterative and work for you, given the information that you'll have as an unanticipated change occurs. So step 1 is assembling a team that's really about making sure that you have the right people in place in order to be able to make thoughtful decision and take action in the best interest of the organization. It's also about making sure that the team is very clear on their responsibilities and expectations in being a part of that team. Assessing the situation focuses on setting a North Star. In an unanticipated change, like I mentioned before, you're likely not going to know all of the details on day 1, but what it helps you do is understand the scope of what is happening and set a finite objective that can help the team and the organization make decisions as new information becomes available. Step 3 is activating agents, and we kind of like to use the old adage that it takes a village to raise a family, and the same is true for when you're driving change. Your response team or your change team or your project team, they're going to be the ones that provide the guidance and the direction for the activities and the actions that the organization takes. But it's going to be the individuals within the organization, like your frontline staff, your managers, your individual contributors, that are going to be the implementers and champions of the change. And that is really what's going to lead to action and commitment. Step 4, developing a plan, is really about establishing those building blocks and actions that get you closer and closer to your North Star. And it focuses on both those technical aspects of what are the processes, systems, tools that we need to change, while also focusing on the emotional aspect. So as Darren mentioned, helping individuals through that change curve with the correct support. Implementing plans is really about building and sustaining momentum as you take action, because again, inaction is a form of action. So making sure that we're, as organizations, acting on our words. And then evaluating adjusting goes back to that idea of an iterative process. It's about looking at what's going well, what isn't going well, and being able to modify plans in the name and the interest of continuous improvement. So that's an overview of each step, and you're going to be able to find specific instructions, resources, tools, templates, best practices for each of these in that unanticipated change guide on the WIPLE website. What we're going to do is spend the rest of the webinar focusing on what we call the ABCs of unanticipated change, and it really helps us get a good understanding of how all of these 6 steps come together in order to drive change. Thank you, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see on this slide, like I mentioned before, ABC is our acronym for thinking about approaching unanticipated change. And again, it incorporates all of those 6 steps that we just took the time to cover. A talks about agreeing on a vision or agreeing on a North Star, and to be able to do that effectively, we have to be able to assemble the right team, and that team needs to be able to take time to assess the situation. B goes back to that village concept. It's about building a coalition and takes into consideration activating agents and then making sure that we're incorporating plans and actions to equip and enable them as we build that coalition. And C is probably our most comprehensive and what I would argue to be most critical piece, not critical in terms of importance, but critical in terms of concept. And one of the things that we find organizations struggle with. So we'll do a little bit of due diligence to help understand what we mean by complementing communication. And we'll talk about how we're able to do that through developing a plan, implementing a plan, and being able to evaluate and adjust. Thank you. So agreeing on a vision, it really has 2 major elements to it. The first of those elements is who, and we talk about the who in relation to assessing the team. The who is really the individuals that are going to be responsible for keeping tabs on the decisions, the actions, and the progress of the change. And then the what is helping them understand the scope of the change. And when we have an understanding of the scope of the change team or the response team can make better decisions on what a future state looks like. And that future state is what we call a North Star. And that's really going to be the guiding light for how decisions are made and how actions get incorporated into the plan. And Darren is our expert on strategic planning and has probably a lot of a really good perspective on why a North Star is so important. So Darren, do you want to jump in here and talk about the importance of a North Star for change and organization, and maybe even tie in a little bit of how that works in your strategic planning work?
Well, thank you, Kia. Yeah, so vision is absolutely critical to successful change management. So organizations often think of vision at an organizational level. So you have mission and vision and core values for an organization, or sometimes they take it down to the level of a strategic vision. So where do we want to head? What's our desired future for the next 3 years or the next 5 years? And that's what they're planning toward. But successful organizations that manage change successfully and help their stakeholders through that process also have a vision for change management. So what they're doing is beginning with the end in mind, and that's what Franklin Covey says, is to begin with the end in mind, to design toward a desired future. So when we get through this change, when we go through that valley of apathy and come out the other side of that, and we're moving to sustained and productive change, what does that look like? And then let's design from the beginning our process for change management and our approach to lead the organization through that and take them to that desired vision or that North Star, as Kia said. So that's why vision is so important to include in change management. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to end up? And then we can start to head in that direction. If we don't do that, if organizations don't take the time to set that desired outcome of what the future looks like, then they're really just reacting to the change. And so you can get through it, but you're not going to do as well as when you start out with a vision in mind. And so that's why that's so critical.
Thanks, Darren. I think that was a fantastic explanation and really hits home the point of in times of fear and uncertainty, having leadership, and when I'm talking about leadership, I'm not talking specifically about people managers or senior leaders, but having individuals in the organization who show ability to influence and navigate and help manage people. I think it speaks very specifically to the leadership ability or the leadership skill of leading with intention through fear and uncertainty. So thanks for that. Thank you, Darren, for switching slides. So B, we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about B, which is building a coalition. So oftentimes what we see as practitioners of change is that organizations are really good about creating an initial response team or a task force or a change team. But what we often see them forget to do is bring in other people who can help champion as well as mobilize that change. The purpose of a coalition is to have an additional set of arms, or a small army, if you will, that can help the team, the change team, the response team, get the word out about the change, to communicate about the expectations for the change, and to be that source, that person-to-person source for the individuals who are on the front lines of the change, who are being impacted on the day-to-day of the change, to help them deal with that emotional transition of the change. So when it comes to the change team building a coalition, we're really talking about equipping and enabling managers, supervisors, and even individual contributors to be successful advocates and implementers of change. That is done in the change guide, in the unanticipated change response guide, through the activating agents step, which helps the team identify what talent is available in the organization to be the most effective champions of change, and then where there also might be gaps in talent that they might need to supplement. And then it also speaks to step 4, which is developing a plan to help the change team take action to give those champions or those agents the tools and information, as well as the support that they need to be effective. And speaking of support, that brings us to our C of our ABCs, which is all about complementing communication, which is the last piece, but definitely not by any means the least important piece. As a matter of fact, I think I said this earlier, I would argue that it's probably the most important concept, because most organizations are really good about communications. And when we're talking about communications from a definition or fundamental basis, we're talking about the sharing of information, the giving and receiving of information. And most organizations do that really well, and they do that really well, particularly through email. But communication is really only a small piece of the change management pie. When you can think probably back to one of your last changes, or even one of the major changes that we're dealing with now, which is COVID-19. A lot of us, as a result of that, had to transition into a full-time work from home situation, which some of us might have been able to work from home parts of the time. Some of us might not have been able to work from home at all. And so when we think about that shift, that change, and we think about it in relation to communication, communication is really those information channels that helped individuals in the organization understand that that was supposed to be the new normal, that the new normal is that because of COVID-19, we are now being asked to work from home. And people got that information through emails, maybe through webinars, through lunch and learn. They might have been told from their direct supervisor. All of those avenues and that information is communication. When you think about that situation in relation to support activities, support is really about giving people the resources that they need in order to be able to make that change, which in this case would be working from home. So it's about giving them additional monitors. It's about setting expectations for what performance in this new normal, this working from home environment looks like. It could also be providing training for how to use the new technology, this new work from home technology. Or it could be creating avenues for people to have a sense of engagement on a team. So all of those are what we're talking about when we're talking about support activities versus communication activities. So in the process of thinking about complementing communication, your change team should really take a look at, or be able to identify ways in which people in the organization can feel like they have a voice and that their voice is heard, so that they can feel like they are being set or are having clear expectations set for them, as well as systems of accountability for how to maintain this new normal. It's looking for ways to supplement coaching or training for this new normal. And then it's also about providing rewards and recognition, as well as incentives in order to sustain optimism and encouragement to continue to participate in this new normal and be engaged and be productive. The other part of complementing communication is one that we've hit on a few times, which is making it an iterative process. So part of what I mentioned about complementing communication is about having an avenue for people to feel like they are being listened to and that their voice is being heard. And as you receive that information, getting responses for feedback back out to the organization is one avenue for complementing communication, but using that information to revisit your plans, to make adjustments, to do what we call in step number 6, evaluate and adjust, is one of the other critical elements to complementing communication. So it's saying that we're not just giving you information, we're collecting the information that you're giving us and making adaptations and edits and revisions to our plan. And in an unanticipated change environment, this will likely need to happen on a much more consistent basis than in a planned change or a rapid change. So we're talking daily or at least weekly meetings at first, and then as your change begins to plateau, thinking about how we can get some more spread in between those meetings and maybe moving those to biweekly or monthly, but making sure that we're from change open to change close, revisiting, revising, and reviewing our plans and our commitment and our support, as well as our communications. So Darren, those are my ABCs. That's our quick 1, 2, 3 of our change overview. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Real briefly, just that don't let perfect be the enemy of good here. Taking an action is what's important. And we started with that quote from Jim Rohn, and there are things that we can own. We may not be able to control what's causing the change, but we can at least control our response. So remember that it's more important to take action than it is to be perfect. So that's all I had.
Well, on that note, thank you, everyone. That's all I got.
Thank you. That's all we got.